Media, the mid-morning show with Mamolefe Sihume. As I had said earlier, we'll be having a conversation with Ntate Nelvis Qekema, the president of Azanian People's Organization. He penned out a beautiful tribute to the late Ntate Mosiua Lekota, who passed on in early March. And it would be such an honor, I think, even for you to just hear a bit of history also, of the people that we see in parliament or in politics, or those that we refer to as activists. We give to them many names, but they know who they are and what they did and what's fitting for them, But it would be great to hear part of the history of who Ntate Lekota is or was, as far as politics and activism is concerned. Ntate Qekema, welcome to Salam Media.
Thank you very much, Mamolefe, and then greetings to you, your viewers in Salam Media, and thank you very much for your humanitarian journalism.
Thank you so much, especially if it's acknowledged from somebody with a background of activism and humanitarian activism, Let's get into it. So many people would see some of the faces in parliament and we are very quick to say whatever we want to say about them. But sometimes we don't even know the person. And you are going to help us get into the person that the Black consciousness got to know as Ntate Terra Lekota. May you give us some background as far as Black consciousness is concerned, how Ntate Lekota was part of that movement, and also as the first generation of the leaders then of the Black consciousness movement.
No, thank you very much. And I think it is right to start by acknowledging that Comrade Lekota, as things stands, was not a member of the Black consciousness movement, was not a member of AZAPO. He had left our organization right inside Robben Island, and then currently he was, at the time of his departure, he was the president of COPE. So it is right, therefore, that as AZAPO, the Black consciousness movement, we should extend our condolences to the Lekota family and COPE as an organization. But then we are the organization, the movement, the Black consciousness movement that brought up Comrade Lekota. We are the movement that really, gave him roots to grow, and we are the movement that allowed him to grow towards the sun and then draw that energy. We are the movement that grounded him, with the earth, with the soil, with the ground. And so he's our product, therefore. And there is a sense in which we believe that once you contract the Black consciousness virus, there is no way that it would ever be curable. It would live with you. Then that's why we had that relationship with him. And then until his passing on.
That's put very well, and thank you for actually highlighting that he was part of the of COPE. But leading to, I'm just going to take from what you've said now. Once the bug bites, and it remains in your bloodstream, so to speak. And one thing that I saw from your tribute you spoke, it's that I won't say title, but that endearment term called tower.
Yes.
You mentioned something about, in the corridors behind the cameras, you'd still call each other tower, and he would still call Ntate Nefolovoto a tower. What is it actually about this tower? Because as I hear and I see a lot of BCM people, they call each other tower. Where did that come from?
Well, a tower is a term of endearment and is a term of belief, a term of hope, a term of faith that we shall overcome, we shall be free one day, and let's keep on going. If you look at the structure called a tower, what we have done as the Black Consciousness Movement is to draw the attributes from that structure. For instance, a tower is towering, is hovering above all else, all that you know. And then so in the Black Consciousness Movement in AZAPO, we're head and shoulders above all others, we believe. And if you look at that structure called a tower, you will also notice that it is the tallest, like I said, and it is visible. So we tend to be visible and highlight, our positive virtues and our connection with the people. And then that visibility, it also has to do with the fearlessness. We don't hide, and then we don't have our lamp, under the table. We have it on top of the table so that we can give light, to the nation and to the world. And then if you look at that structure, it is strong. It can withstand, adverse weathers, inclement weather, and the wind and everything, the storms, thunderstorms, you name them, lightning. It can withstand all those. It can stand the test of time. It can stand those challenges like the Black Consciousness Movement has done. But above all, it is also it can be very dangerous, to aircrafts that is wandering, flying, not knowing where it is going. And that is why you find that in all towers, you have those lights on top, red lights flashing there, trying to warn you that I'm dangerous and I'll crush you, So that's the kind of message that we have in the Black Consciousness Movement about the term tower. We are towering head and shoulders above all others when it comes to integrity, when it comes to truth, when it comes to perseverance, when it comes to tenacity and keep going, never give up.
That's explained. You've actually helped me understand a part of my upbringing because you just hear people around tower, but you just take it as just a nickname for all the uncles and the aunties. It's tower. But actually understanding and engaging with the word sort of helps and educates. And we mentioned that Bontate Lekota were the first generation of the BCM. And with the traits that they had to actually, start that movement, carry it, and see it through until whatever time when, paths had to, people had to go different paths. What would you say the generation now is taking or should be taking from that first generation, Bontate Lekota?
First of all, you must understand that those guys were pioneers. They were initiators. They did not wait for anybody else, because they believed that they were the ones they were waiting for, so to speak, and they were the change they wanted to see happening. And immediately they lived that change, and then they pursued that change. And then it is the reason why, for instance, when they came to the fore, you will remember that in 1960, both ANC and PAC were banned, and then when they were banned, the apartheid regime, the settler colonial minority regime, descended heavily upon them. Police harassment, people were killed, mass imprisonment, and as a result of that, and many leaders left the country, our Azania, into exile. So that then means for about a decade, there was no direction in the country. People have no political home, so to speak, and people were so scared to even talk about politics. And sometimes it is legendary spoken about that people were so scared to talk about politics, others will speak, under the blankets about politics, even they had meetings, and then they would, switch off the lamp or blow out the lamp, and then when you speak, you compress your nostrils so that people cannot identify who it was who was speaking. And you had Comrade Terra Lekota, and then coming into a situation like that where they had to start things from scratch, and then where they had to be fearless, and then go where else had ran away from going. And then a lot of other people were underground. So they would not be underground. They said, we're going to be above ground. Remember, you were talking about teenagers. Teenagers. They said, we're not going underground. We're going to be above ground. And we're going to start something completely new. And then they took the positive virtues from the PAC and from the ANC, and from there they started something completely new. And then they started saying to black people, hey, you've got to be involved. And then they started slogans like, black men, you are on your own, we're up. And then immediately they started to say, we cannot depend on the enemy for our survival. And then they started with those community development projects, like there's an Impilo clinic in Ezinyoka in the Eastern Cape and near King Williamstown, or Qonce as we know now. And there was another one in Limpopo, because that one was run by Steve Biko. There was another one that was run by Comrade Mampila Rampele in Limpopo, and there were literacy projects, and there were bursary funds, and there were a lot of things, and they were even building, furniture. Companies that were building furniture, shoes, and leather wax, upholstery, all those type of things, and they were creating jobs.
So they were, for them, leadership was a doing word.
Indeed.
When they said we are going to lead, they did, and they were practical. That's what and those programs were under the Black People's
Black Community Projects,
Yes.
BCP, the Black Community Projects. Can you see? You have people who are saying, hey, do it yourself. Don't depend on the enemy. Create jobs for yourself, a livelihood for yourself. And then they had fleet of cars. They were able to move around and do things. And they were doing all that in the belly of the beast. Doing all that in the belly of the beast. And then they did not end there. They started now trying to conscientize people, because they were saying, look, as Steve Biko said, you've got to work on the mind, because for them, psychological liberation was the starting point, because there's no point in being free physically when you are not psychologically, because you will mess up with that physical liberation. It will end up strangulating you yourself, who has brought it about. So you've got to move from a clean slate and liberate your mind to liberate the land, liberate your mind to liberate the people. That was their belief. And they move on. And then going throughout the country. Remember those days, you had to sacrifice and go by train and then take a bus and walk, and then, up and down. And then if you travel anywhere, you may come after a month and all that, be away from your family. These were the type of, and we were talking about teenagers.
Yes,
let's not forget
people.
that. Young people.
Yes.
Teenagers. And we're talking about young people who, for about a decade, which means that they had no real role models that they observed and they saw, they learned from. They were starting something from afresh, and they came up with the Black consciousness philosophy. And then following that philosophy, they then started going to the core of the Black person, and then turned and transformed the Black person and said, look, that time of looking at yourself as subhuman, inhuman, not being a person or a human being or less than an animal is gone. And then they started saying to them, no, do away with the lightening creams. You are right as the way you are. Your skin is correct the way it is. That's how God meant you to be. That's how God created you. And then they lie, going to those days, our parents would go to, take a brick and then bake it on the primer stove.
For the hair.
Yeah, the hair, to straighten the hair, because they resented that their hair was woolly like sheep, and then they wanted to straighten it, and they wanted it to be long and then to reach the shoulder shoulders down, and then when in fact that's not how it was meant to be.
Sure.
So they were turned around, and then we changed even the way we walked, and we had to return to walk to ourselves. This kind of things we learn in the so-called beauty contest had to be done away with, because you are right, walk the way you have to walk, the way you are.
That, if I may interject, it reminds me of a conversation Salam Media we had with advocate Nakedi Ribane. Because she wrote a book around that, your own kind of beauty. It's talking about your own kind of beauty as a person, and of course as a Black person, having to do what they did, it must have taken a lot, especially considering that they were still young. At this age, the era that we are at, we hover over kids a lot, and we still always refer to them as, oh, they are kids. Oh no, leave them, they are kids. So, oh no, protect them. But it looks like that leadership took on leadership and a whole lot of things on their shoulders while they were very young. And not only did they keep it in South Africa, let's talk about the Viva Frelimo rallies, because that now extended to Mozambique. It now was pulling in the brotherhood of other neighboring countries. Can you take us through because Ndate Lekota was one of the known SASO 9. So if you can tell us about that history.
Yes, and now once they got involved, change the mind of the Black person, as Steve Biko says, inject life into the empty shell of the Black person, which is what exactly they did. And then starting building up community development projects that I talked about, so that you can be self-reliant, self-assertive, because now you're not dependent on somebody else. You created your own job, your own livelihood. They then started building of forming sectoral political organizations for the youth, NAYO, for the journalists, UBJ, SASO, South African Students Organization, SASM, Black People's Convention, a whole lot of them, and trade unions. And which is why as early as 1972, out of the awareness that was there was the general strike that was there by workers already, from the Black Allied Workers Union in 1972, and so then you had a situation where these people were working so hard in conscientizing the people, and that's the term they used, and to try and school you and educate you on who you are and your political responsibilities, your humanity responsibilities, and their struggle was international in terms of solidarity. So in 1974, just next door, Mozambique, was freed, liberated by Frelimo. And that happened also because in Spain, the colonizing force, there was a coup inside Spain, which meant that the Spanish forces had to withdraw from Mozambique, and then Frelimo was free in 1974. And that freedom just on the borders gave them a lot of hope that things can happen. And then they took that experience, and then they pledged solidarity across the board. And then they started then as students, university students in SASO, organizing the Viva Frelimo rallies. That's when now they remember, here is something, it was banned on the eve, a day before, banned by the apartheid regime, and they knew that. They saw the banning order script and they say, no, we are carrying on, we are doing it, and they defied, which is why thereafter they were then arrested, harassed and arrested, and sent to prison.
Okay, so now we look at the seriousness of trying to rally a people, conscientize a people, and make a people to believe in themselves and say, nathi singabantu, but also something that I think it's less talked about in this activism, and it's the lighter things, but very impactful and very intentional. Things like soccer. You mentioned how Ndate Tera got his nickname from soccer, just like Malum Poju, Patrick. And the thing is, I don't know, coincidence, both of them are Patrick. Patrick Molala and Patrick Lekota. And the late that we're talking about is Ntate Thera, and he got his nickname from soccer. And same as Let Them Dance, which was Ntate Molala. Both were significant part of the BCM, but they used soccer and some humor. You mentioned humor. So as a whole person, young as they were, these are some of the things that they used to still propel this conscientization. What can you say about that?
They understood that you could not be one-dimensional if you're a revolutionary. There are a lot of things that you've got to be doing because society is rounded. Society is involved in a multiplicity of manifestations and platforms. You've got to have those multiplicity of manifestations in yourself and then get involved in those multiplicity of platforms. And football was one of those. That's where you will now have people who are coming not directly for politics, but coming from entertainment. But as they are entertained, you use that platform to convert them and conscientize them into politics, and then using that entertainment energy into a revolutionary energy to liberate themselves. And Comrade Lekota was a great football star. And then because he was terrorizing, the strikers, the defenders of the opposing team, the opponents. And then he was now given the name Terror, and then because of his skills in football. And then you had another comrade, and they ended up on Robben Island together, which is Nkosi Pocho Molala. And then they share the name Patrick, both of them. And they used to be in opposing teams because Pocho Nkosi Molala was in a PEX. He was a student in Limpopo, in Polokwane at PEX College. Whilst a comrade Thera Lekota was a student in Teflop in Mankweng. So they used to play against each other, and other Thera Lekota terrorizing these ones, and then Nkosi Molala letting them dance. So but they then ended up on Robben Island, but even on Robben Island, they did not let their guards down, and they started pursuing things. And that's where you saw how they changed even Robben Island. When they got there, they used to wear shorts. Prisoners, inmates used to wear shorts, and then they rejected those things. And then when they got there, they were forced that you must shave your hair and whatever. And they demanded to know, where is that written on these rules that I must shave my hair? Because on the rules, it is only said I must keep my hair clean, but not shave my hair. And then they defied and they refused to shave their hair. Remember, there was the time of the afro, and the hair meant everything. So they kept their hair. They preserved their hair. And that's what you get in Comrade Thera Lekota, that even on Robben Island, that thing for transformation, for change, they brought it on Robben Island, onto Robben Island.
Yeah, you also have to acknowledge, as you're saying, I'm repeating it, you're dealing with a whole person, whether an activist or just a walker by. We're going to be wrapping up this talk. It feels like it actually needs its own slot where we unpack history. We usually hear it from the so-called other, but it's always good to hear things as they happened, things that are not in the book, in the textbooks. In conclusion, Ntate Qekema, what would you say, what is it that we can do, because these are now different times. It was do or die then. That's how it was seen. And right now it's almost like we are just cruising nicely, as Ntate Malema says. What would you say we should be taking from Bo Ntate Lekota in honoring him, if we are to honor legacy that they have started, that he has started? What would you say we need to do, because we have a nation to be, we have this country and this country only. We have this continent and this continent only.
I think the first thing is a fearlessness, because if you're still gripped with fear, there's nothing you can do. And these guys made things happen in the belly of the beast, like I said, and pioneership, and then starting things yourselves, do it yourselves, initiative, take initiative, let things happen. And then self-reliance, don't depend on others, depend on yourself. You can't depend on your enemy for food parcels, for money for you to pursue your own struggle. And then if you look at what is happening now, the values are now different, because we're now talking about democracy or freedom, which whose basis has been built by the Black consciousness movement, the Terra Lekota we're talking about, and then the guys who were able to conscientize people to a level of fearlessness where they were able and to rise, the 1976 uprising, June 16 uprisings. But what do you find today? You find something completely different, where the leaders, instead of giving to the people, they're stealing from the people. And they are now chewing on the Zondo commissions, and then on the arms deal commissions, the Madlanga commissions. And if you look at what is happening there, it is the shame of what our leadership has brought. Other leaders, are sleeping with money in their mattresses when the people need that money, and they are stuffing that money into their furniture in their farms when the people need that money. Is the type of thing that you are now getting, which more Terra Lekota, and which is another thing you can learn from Terra Lekota, is fearlessness again, but also openness. They say it the way it is. You will know that he had a scuffle in Parliament with President Ramaphosa, reminding him, the kind of things that were negative that he did during the struggle, and then reminding even Comrade Zuma, he calling him names right on the podium, and reminding other young people that there's no need for you to want to die for Zuma, die for the people.
I guess this is how we are going to wrap it up. And I hope you've taken the gems that you've taken, be it historic, be it about character building, be it about nation building. But we hope that the listeners have taken from what you've been able to share and the part of history that we hardly hear. We appreciate you being here with us, and we hope that further we can engage with you, maybe even with some historical whatever it is that we get involved with, or if we want to drink from your well in terms of the knowledge and the history, we hope to be talking to you soon, that it doesn't end here. Thank you so much. And with that, we'd like to say, Ko Baga Lekota hore nqanqae, Modimo ke yo. We have seen what you have afforded the people through Ntate wa lona and your husband, your brother, and we appreciate. We'll go for an ad break before we get into the next talk.
Thank you so much.
Salam Media, your spiritual companion this Ramadan.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get